You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Beneath President Donald Trump's mendacious contempt for Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and his cringing admiration for Russia, there does seem to be a kernel of strategic reasoning.
Well, if I didn't align myself with both of them, you'd never have a deal. You want me to say really terrible things about Putin and then say, "Hi, Vladimir, how are we doing on the deal?" That doesn't work that way.
Mr. Trump isn't wrong that America has borne the burdens of global leadership for too long. Would the new president really turn his back on the long-established liberal order and lead the US toward a great power approach to global strategy? In recent months, there's been much talk in diplomatic circles of a new Yalta, the 1945 conference on the Black Sea where the leaders of the US, the UK and the Soviet Union struck a deal to carve up the planet after the Second World War.
It's the beginning of a conference which has already given our enemies the jitters, for the Hun still doesn't like the idea of unconditional surrender.
Mr. Trump's apparent hunger for US territorial expansion, Greenland, Panama, Gaza, and maybe even 51st state Canada, his ambitions to tie foreign policy to the exploitation of economic resources, his seeming acquiescence to Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping suggest a hard-edged foreign policy realism revolving around a new Big Three approach.
What do you make of Russia celebrating and saying what the U.S. is doing lines up with their vision?
They're going to say what their position is. What we should pay attention to here in the United States of America is the American people.
So set aside moral indignation for a moment and take at face value this potentially profound shift in foreign policy, which, to my mind, has three potential implications. First, territorial insecurity.
Americans are the best of our friends, Europeans are the best of our friends, and Putin with Russian, they're enemies. And it doesn't mean that we don't want peace. We just want to recognize the reality, the real situation.
In the Trumpian vision of a world in which great powers seize what they can, we can expect a much more fluid, muscular approach to international boundaries than the last half-century's effort at a rules-based system. Nowhere will that potential be viewed with greater alarm than in Taiwan. Unlike Ukraine, the US has already ceded, by signing up to the One China policy, the principle behind Beijing's claim to the territory, although we continue to say we will oppose its annexation by force.
We have a long-standing position on Taiwan that we're not going to abandon, and that is we are against any forced, compelled, coercive change in the status of Taiwan.
The question is, how essential does Mr. Trump think a free Taiwan is to American security? How realistic is the idea that Mr. Trump, who values his record as a peacemaker, will get us into World War III to defend Taiwan's de facto independence?
We're dealing with the smartest people. They hate when I say, when I call President Xi, they said, he called President Xi brilliant. Well, he's a brilliant guy. He controls 1.4 billion people with an iron fist. I mean, he's a brilliant guy, whether you like it or not.
Mr. Trump's language on Taiwan is hardly reassuring. He's been critical of aspects of the island's economy, its semiconductor dominance and trade with the United States. Although there is an argument to suggest that his approach to Russia,
Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt.
Represents a rather hardened approach to Taiwan.
President Trump was the one who really introduced the need for us to prioritize a more realistic and I would say kind of confrontational policy towards China to get to a place of peace. And I think that's what you see from his messaging is, yes, absolute strength. And Vice President-elect Vance has been really articulate on the need to focus on that, precisely to operate from a peace through strength approach, but also to be willing to negotiate with Xi Jinping.
The second potential implication of radical foreign policy change along Trumpian lines is nuclear proliferation.
We've got to modernize our nuclear fleet. The key thing about nuclear weapons is you don't ever want to use them. But having reliable, robust, secure weapons is the key to keeping the peace.
The big difference between the great power world of the past and that of today is the thermonuclear bomb. If small nations can no longer rely on powerful allies to protect them against predators, they have one last option: the threat of nuclear annihilation for any country that tries to invade.
I had a very good relationship with President Xi, and a very good relationship with Putin, and a very good relationship with Kim Jong-un, who has a nuclear force that you won't even believe.
Until recently unthinkable, in the past month, nuclear proliferation has become probable in Europe. Germany's new Chancellor-to-be, Friedrich Merz, has floated the idea that his country could share British and French nuclear weapons. Elsewhere, debate is underway in Poland about obtaining nukes. The Poles surely well remember how, in 1994, Ukraine gave up its own nuclear weapons, inherited from the Soviet Union, for a security guarantee by the US, UK, and Russia.
Skeptics once claimed that the nuclear threat would actually grow after the Soviet Union dissolved. But because of the wisdom and statesmanship of the leaders who joined me here, the skeptics have been proven wrong.
In Asia, Japan has long been on the technical threshold of nuclear weapon capability and will surely soon move over it. South Korea, too, menaced as it is by its northern neighbour, would likely follow suit. And that brings us to the third implication of the new approach: geopolitical and economic realignments.
I've spoken many times with President Trump. He is a good friend. And he is totally committed, as he said many times, to Article 5, to NATO, so please let's stop gossiping about what the US might or might not do.
For all its frailties as a geopolitical force, the European Union economy is many times the size of Russia's, and combined with the UK's, is on a par with America's. It's already heavily dependent on China. Europeans may now seek closer ties with Beijing, with troubling implications for American interests.
Those who are criticizing his efforts in this way are showing that they are not committed to peace. And in the case of many of those European countries, that they're not committed to the cause and values of freedom.
Mr. Trump may well like his new world order, but it'll come at a steep price.